All right, let's go. Number 9. The guest star of 1006. In the spring of 2006, a new star switched on over the world. It threw off enough light that people could see the ground at night. It didn't move like a comet. It didn't fade by morning. In Cairo, an 18-year-old climbed onto a roof and tried to describe something that had no name. In China, the court had to explain it to an emperor, and then it went out for good. The 18-year-old grew up to be Ali ibn Ridwan, a physician and astrologer in Fustat, the old capital beside Cairo. Decades later, writing a commentary on Ptolemy, he went back to that night. The thing was a large circular body. He said 2.5 to 3 times the size of Venus. The sky was shining because of its light. Its intensity, he wrote, was a little more than a quarter of the light of the moon. That is a wild claim. And for a long time, it was treated as exactly that. Because the people who wrote this down weren't neutral observers. They were astrologers paid to find meaning in the sky and sell it. A star that outshines every planet, hangs around for months, then quietly disappears, is exactly what an omen monger would invent. And there was nothing left to check that patch of sky in the constellation. Lupus is empty to the naked eye. Just old men insisting something enormous used to be there. It took 9.5 centuries and a radio dish. In 1965, a radio telescope in Australia swept that region and found a ring, a faint expanding shell of gas and shock, sitting precisely where the records said the star had been. It was a supernova, specifically a white dwarf that pulled in more matter than it could hold and detonated about 7,200 light years away. So the explosion itself happened while the first farming villages of Mesopotamia were still going up, and the light spent 7 millennia in transit before it arrived over Egypt. Modern estimates put it at magnitude -7.5, at peak better than 10 times brighter than Venus at its best. It is the brightest stellar event in recorded human history, and nothing since has come close. The Chinese court said the same thing from the far side of the world. The song histories have it plainly visible in broad daylight. And that's the part that matters. 2 sets of observers, thousands of miles apart, sharing no vocabulary and no contact, reaching independently for the same impossible comparisons. There's a small human detail buried in the Chinese record too. The court astrologer Zhou Qiming was out of the capital when it appeared, and when he finally got in front of the emperor, he reported that the star was yellow, brilliant and auspicious, a sign of great prosperity ahead. Reading the room is an old profession. Europe saw it too, and barely reacted. The monks at the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland wrote down a star in the deep south that seemed to contract, then spread, then go out and come back on and off for 3 months. From that latitude, it never climbed far off the horizon. They wrote it down the way you'd note unusual weather. Ali ibn Ridwan did not. He spent the rest of the passage explaining what it meant, and what it meant in his reading was war and famine and plague, which over the years that followed is roughly what the region got. That's the trouble with omens. Given enough time, they're never wrong. The shell is still expanding. It's now about 60 light years across, and from Earth, it covers roughly as much sky as the full moon, a circle you could blot out with your thumbnail containing the entire wreckage of a star. You can't see any of it. It shows up in radio and X-ray, in narrow slices of the optical spectrum and instruments, not in eyes. For 3 months in 106, everyone living south of roughly the latitude of Paris could walk outside and look at the same object. It is the only site on this list that lit the ground. And there is no version of the future where anyone sees it again. That star announced itself. The next one had to be advertised. Number 8. The comet that made a god. Julius Caesar was stabbed to death in March. By July, he was a god. You know the assassination. The Senate. Floor 23. Wounds the most rehearsed murder in European history. What gets left out is what finished the job. Turning a dead politician into an official deity of the Roman state was not a foregone conclusion. It took a vote eventually, but first it took a light in the sky. In late July of 44 BC, Caesar's 19-year-old heir was staging games in his adoptive father's honor. And during those games, a comet appeared in the northern sky and stayed for 7 days. rising in the late afternoon, bright enough to hold its own against a sky that hadn't finished setting. We have the heir's own account of it because Pliny the Elder quoted his memoirs. The common people Augustus wrote believed the star meant Caesar's soul had been received among the immortal gods. And for that reason, the emblem of a star was added to the bust of Caesar in the Forum. Careful, modest, deniable. Pliny then adds the part that gives the whole thing away. In private, Augustus was delighted because he took the star to be born for himself and himself to be born in it. And this mattered legally, not just poetically. Once the Senate formally made Caesar a god of the Roman state, his adopted heir became Divi Filius, son of the deified. Every coin Augustus struck, every inscription he raised, every claim he made on the loyalty of the legions runs back through that phrase. The comet didn't decorate the story. It underwrote it. So there it is. The most consequential piece of political theater in the ancient world, and the stage lighting was supplied by an object nobody has been able to identify since. Astronomers have given it a catalog designation and a set of orbital elements. The perihelion is estimated at about a fifth of the distance from the Earth to the Sun, which means it's swung in closer than Mercury ever gets. But those elements come with a caveat that rarely survives the retelling. The eccentricity wasn't measured. It was assumed. To fit in orbit at all, you have to guess the shape first, and the guess everyone uses is a parabola, a one-way trip. Nothing matching this comet has been recorded, coming back in 2,000 years. That's the whole of our evidence. The problems stack. John Ramsey, a classicist at the University of Illinois at Chicago, spent years reconstructing the event and moved the games from September, where earlier scholars had put them, to late July. His reconstruction has the Chinese record of a broom star in May and the Roman sighting in July as the same object with a violent brightening in between. It's the best account anyone has. It is not a consensus. And then there's the silence. Cicero wrote constantly through that summer, letters, speeches, philosophy, gossip. He had strong opinions about Caesar, about Octavian, about omens, about everything, and correspondence in Rome feeding him all of it. A comet that supposedly convinced the Roman public their dictator had ascended to heaven appears nowhere in any of it. The comet coinage tells a similar story. The unambiguous issue, Augustus on one side, a flaming 8-rayed star, and the words Divus Iulius on the other, was minted around 26 years after the comet came and went. That's not a nation reacting. That's a regime curating. So the file stays open, and it has to, somewhere out past the outer planets, if the parabola is anywhere near right, there's a dark object more than 800 times further from the sun than we are, still moving away, carrying no memory of what it started. We can't recover its orbit. We can't confirm it's the same comet the Chinese logged. We can't even be sure the Romans reacted the way Augustus said they did. All we know for certain is that something burned over Rome for 7 days, and an empire was built partly on the assumption that it meant something. Number 7. Algol, the star that goes out. There's a star in Perseus that goes dark on a schedule. Not metaphorically, it drops about 70% of its light, takes roughly 10 hours to do it, and then climbs back. It's called Algol, from the Arabic Algol, the ghoul, the demon. In the Greek arrangement of that sky, it sits in the severed head of Medusa, held out at arm's length by Perseus. Hebrew tradition attached similar associations. Multiple cultures, working independently, put something monstrous at precisely the point in the sky where the star misbehaves. That is either a coincidence, or it isn't, and reasonable people disagree. Here's the machine underneath. Algol is 2 stars, not 1. A hot blue-white one, and a swollen orange one, orbiting so close and so nearly edge on to us that the dim one slides directly in front of the bright one on every lap. The lap takes 2 days and 21 hours. When the eclipse comes, the brightest thing in that corner of Perseus fades to something you'd have to hunt for, and then it comes back. It does this more than 120 times a year, forever, in full view of anyone who looks up, 2 nights running. And it costs nothing to see. No telescope, no filter, no dark sight. Algol sits in a neighborhood of stars that never change. So the comparison is free. Look at it one night. Look again, 2 nights later. And it's visibly dimmer than the stars around it. Any culture that watched one patch of sky through a season would have caught it. The question was never whether it's noticeable. European astronomy did not officially notice until the 1600s, which raises an obvious question about who did. There's a papyrus in Cairo, a Ramesside document roughly 3,200 years old, listing every day of the year as favorable or unfavorable, and splitting each one into 3 parts. It is a magic calendar. It never mentions a star. Lori Jetsu at the University of Helsinki ran statistical period analysis on the pattern of good and bad days and reported a rhythm buried inside it, repeating every 2.850 days. Algol's eclipse period today is 2.867 days. The gap between those two numbers is about 25 minutes. That claim has been challenged hard, and the challenge deserves stating plainly. A 2021 reanalysis argued that the rhythm is an artifact of the document's own arithmetic. A calendar that chops every single day into 3 graded parts will generate repeating patterns near that length, all by itself purely from its own structure, whether or not anybody ever looked at the sky. And the papyrus contains no astronomical language. No scribe wrote down a star. The pattern is real. The interpretation is a reach, and it hasn't been answered. What isn't in dispute is the star. Algol's clock is running down, and we can measure it. The swollen orange star has expanded past its own gravitational limit and is bleeding material onto its blue companion. As that mass transfers, the orbit widens, and a wider orbit means a longer lap. The eclipse you can watch tonight arrives on a slightly later schedule than the eclipse anyone watched in the Bronze Age. Whether Egyptian scribes clocked it is argued. That it has changed is not. The man who worked out what was happening was John Goodricke, and he was 18 years old. He had been deaf since early childhood. Over the winter of 1782, from a window in York, he counted the star down and back, and proposed that a dark body was passing in front of it. He was right more than a century before anyone could prove it. The Royal Society gave him its highest medal. He died of pneumonia at 21, 4 days after they elected him a fellow before the news reached him. The period he measured has already drifted off. The star keeps its own time, and it was never going to keep his. Number 6. Thuban the North that moved. The Great Pyramid was not aimed at the North Star. It's aimed at true north, and it misses by about a 1/16 of a degree. The year is somewhere around 2500 BC. It's the middle of the night on the Giza Plateau. Somebody is standing in the dark with a plumb line sighting the sky, laying out the foundation of the tallest structure anyone will build for the next 3,500 years. Across a base longer than 2 football fields, they will end up off true north by less than a foot. For a long time, the polite reading was luck. The builders left no manual. Nothing in the surviving Egyptian texts explains how they found north, and archaeologists are rightly allergic to projecting modern astronomy onto people who never wrote it down. Trial and error can do a lot with enough workers and enough time. That argument was never unreasonable. The mistakes gave them away. Kate Spence, an Egyptologist at the University of Cambridge, noticed in 2000 that the pyramids are not all equally accurate and that their errors aren't random. Mitam leans one way. Khufu is nearly perfect. Menkaure leans the other way. Line the pyramids up in the order they were built, and the errors walk steadily across zero in a straight line, at a rate that matches the drift of the sky itself. Her proposal was that the builders used 2 circumpolar stars, watched for the moment they stood vertically above one another and dropped a plumb line through them. Picture the actual job. You stand outside all night, watching 2 stars swing around the pole like the ends of a slow propeller, waiting for the one moment they sit exactly one above the other. You drop a weighted string. You sight along it, scratch a line into the bedrock, and come back the following night to check yourself against your own line. Do that patiently enough, for long enough, and you can lay out a foundation. You could lose a village inside and still find north to within a hand's width. Her dating is disputed, and the specific star pair is disputed. Other astronomers proposed a different pair entirely. A later paper showed that the shadow of a stick at the equinox reproduces the same pattern of errors just as well, using no stars at all. That argument is live. The sky underneath it isn't. Earth spins like a top that's losing its nerve, and the axis traces a slow circle, roughly every 26,000 years. The north it points at moves. Around 2800 BC, the pole sat almost exactly on a star in Draco called Thuban, close enough to be a genuine anchor. In a way Polaris wouldn't be for another 4,000 years. The Egyptians had a name for the stars that never set. Ikimusek, the ones not knowing destruction. The pyramid texts send the dead king north to join them because a star that never dips below the horizon never dies. That was the whole point of pointing a tomb at the sky. That's also the best available reading of the strangest thing in the building. The descending passage is a shaft cut straight down through the masonry and on into the rock at an angle Flinders Petrie measured at 26.5 degrees. At Giza's latitude that aims at a patch of sky just below the pole, precisely where a circumpolar star sits at the lowest point of its nightly circle. No Egyptian text says that's what it's for. It's an inference. It is also very hard to look at that angle and think of anything else. Thuban today is magnitude 3.65. It's up there right now in the tail of Draco, and from anywhere with streetlights, it is simply not there. They aimed the heaviest building on Earth at a star. The star moved. Nobody looks for it now. Giza's sky slid out of position across thousands of years. The next one changed in an afternoon. Number 5. The Red Cross of 774. In the year 774, something hit this planet hard enough to show up inside every tree on it. Cut a Japanese cedar. Cut a German oak. A Russian pine. A New Zealand kauri. Count the rings back to the same year, and in all of them, the wood goes strange in the same way at the same moment on opposite sides of the world. A tree ring is one summer. The whole event fits inside one. Fusa Miyake, working at Nagoya University, found it in 2012 measuring radiocarbon in cedar rings 1 year at a time. Between 774 and 775, the carbon-14 in the atmosphere jumped by about 1.1%, roughly 20 times the ordinary year-to-year wobble, and then decayed away slowly. Sharp spike, slow tail. That shape means the whole thing was delivered at once. Her paper did not say what caused it. She and her colleagues wrote that neither a solar flare nor a nearby supernova looked likely, and left the cause open. The answer came out of the ice. Greenland and Antarctica both hold the signal in beryllium and chlorine isotopes laid down at both poles in the same season. That symmetry is the tell. Charged particles get steered by Earth's magnetic field toward the poles. A gamma ray burst wouldn't bend. So it was the sun an event tens of times, stronger than anything we have ever measured with instruments, the largest particle storm of the last 11,000 years, delivered in under a year. Nobody in 705 was harmed by it, because there was nothing up there to harm. An event that size arriving tonight would sleet through every satellite in orbit, and dose the crew of any aircraft flying a polar route. The atmospheric modeling says it would take a measurable bite out of the ozone layer too, and more than a year to heal. The 8th century sky didn't need a power grid to survive. Ours does. Which raises the question of what people actually saw. The record on that goes thin and interesting at the same time. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, under the year 774, reads, "This year also appeared in the heavens a red crucifix after sunset." It goes on in the same breath to mention a battle at Otford and wonderful serpents seen in the land of the South Saxons. Chinese chronicles from the same window record red vapor in the sky, an event that size should have pushed aurora down into latitudes that never get it in exactly that shade. Be careful with that though. The manuscripts don't agree on the year, and a 2015 analysis argued the Red Cross was an ice halo display rather than an aurora, possibly misdated by 2 years. The eyewitness link is suggestive, and nobody has managed to nail it down. The wood is another matter. And that's the strange, quiet heart of this one. For 1,200 years, the only human record of the largest solar event in our history was one line in a monastery chronicle that nobody believed. That and a ring of wood nobody had thought to read. The memory was sitting in a forest the entire time. We just didn't have the instrument. It turned out to be worth more as a clock than as a warning. In 2021, Margot Keatums at the University of Groningen used a later spike from 9993 on Norse wood dug out of Lance O. Meadows in Newfoundland. She found the spike in the rings, counted outward to the bark, and got a single year for when the tree was felled, 1021. Metal blade marks Norse camp exact date. That is the first firm date for Europeans in the Americas, and the moment our species finished going all the way around. A monk wrote down a red cross in the sky and got shelved under superstition for a millennium. The trees filed the same event under physics. Number 4. The red Sirius. Every Roman who described the brightest star in the sky called it red. It isn't red. It never was. You know, Sirius, even if you don't know the name, the hard spark glow in the winter sky, the one that throws off flickers of color when it's near the horizon. Blue-white. Obviously, point it out to anyone and they'll agree. Around AD 150, Claudius Ptolemy compiled the Almagest, the catalog that ran European astronomy for the next 1400 years. In it, he tags exactly 6 stars with the Greek word hypokeiros, somewhere in the range between tawny and reddish. 5 of them are Arcturus, Aldebaran, Pollux, Antares, and Betelgeuse. Go outside and find those 5. Every single one is orange or red right now, exactly as advertised. The man had a good eye and a consistent vocabulary. The 6th is Sirius. He's not alone in it. Seneca wrote a line usually rendered as the red of the dog star is more intense, that of Mars milder. Horace passed along a source calling it the red dog. Something in the Latin record keeps insisting on a color the star doesn't have. And it can't be what it sounds like. Sirius has a companion, a white dwarf, the burnt-out core of a star that was once considerably bigger than Sirius itself. For that core to have been a red giant 2,000 years ago, it would have had to throw off an entire outer atmosphere in the interval. That atmosphere would still be sitting around the system as a glowing shell. There isn't one. Nothing. And the dwarf's measured temperature says it has been cooling for something like 120 million years. Not 2,000. The astrophysics on this closed decades ago. The other half of the problem is the Chinese record. Sima Qian, the Han court historian, was cataloging the same sky roughly 2 centuries before Ptolemy, and he used Sirius as the reference standard for the color white. Not as an example of white, as the definition of it. Every later Chinese source agrees. Same star, same era, opposite verdict. The best explanation anyone has offered, worked through in detail in 1999 by the astrophysicist Douglas Whittet, is that both records are honest because they're describing different observations. It helps to know why the whole Mediterranean was outside at dawn in the first place. Sirius drops out of the sky for weeks every year, swallowed by the sun's glare. The morning it comes back, one hard spark low in the east. Just ahead of the sunrise, Egypt used that to mark the coming of the Nile flood. Rome inherited the date and named the sweltering weeks that followed after the dog. So the single most culturally loaded moment in the ancient calendar was a moment when Sirius sat as low as it ever gets. At the horizon, you're looking through the maximum possible thickness of atmosphere, and atmosphere reddens light exactly the way it reddens a setting sun. Chinese astronomers had no such fixation. They looked at Sirius when it was high and wrote down white. There's a textual angle underneath that too. An Arab astronomer working directly from Ptolemy's catalog centuries later didn't render Sirius as reddish at all, which points less at a changing star than at a copyist somewhere in the chain who added a word that stuck. So the mystery isn't in the star. It's in the words and in where people happen to be standing when they chose them. Ancient color vocabulary maps badly onto ours. The same terms slide between hue, heat, and sheer brightness, and translators have been quietly picking sides for centuries. Sirius hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The people looking at it changed completely. And the one instrument that could settle it, an ancient eye at an ancient horizon at 4 in the morning in August, doesn't exist anymore and never will. Sirius is a witness we can't cross-examine. The next one left something behind that answers for itself 30 times a second. Number 3. The guest star of 1054. For 23 days in the summer of 1054, there were 2 objects in the daytime sky. It's the 4th of July. Yang Weidi, an official observer at the Song Court, is writing down a star that wasn't there the night before. The record survives. A guest star has appeared to the southeast of Tianguan. It had been seen in daylight like Venus, altogether visible for 23 days. Reddish-white, the Chinese texts say, with pointed rays in 4 directions. Tianguan is the star we call Zeta Tauri in the Horn of the Bull. After it stopped being a daytime object, it hung on as a nighttime one for roughly 21 more months. Europe has nothing. Every candidate record has been examined and rejected. Wrong dates, wrong descriptions. Chronicles written 4 centuries after the fact. An object bright enough to see at noon sat over Christendom for 3 weeks, and not one surviving European document credibly mentions it. The usual explanation is doctrinal. In the cosmology Europe had inherited, everything above the moon was perfect and unchanging. A new star wasn't a discovery. It was a contradiction. Whether that's the reason or not, the silence is real, and it has survived every attempt to talk it away. The wreckage got cataloged long before anybody knew what it was. In 1758, a comet hunter mistook a fuzzy smear in Taurus for the comet he was chasing. He got irritated enough by the error to start a list of objects that were definitely not comets. And he put the smear at the top of it. The list is still in use. That's why the object has the number 1. In 1928, Edwin Hubble measured that shredded filamentary nebula and found it was expanding. He ran the expansion backwards, got an explosion roughly 900 years earlier, and pointed out that the Chinese had written down a guest star in that exact patch of sky. The nebula is the Crab. Its light left it about 6,500 years ago. The star was already ancient history when its own death notice arrived over Kaifeng. 40 years after that, in 1968, radio astronomers at Green Bank found something at the center of it pulsing. Regularly, about 30 times a second, with the reliability of an atomic clock. That is the star. What's left of it anyway? Think about what actually happened in there. Take something heavier than the sun and squeeze it until the atoms give up their structure entirely and the electrons are crushed into the protons. What you're left with is a sphere about 20 kilometers across the length of Manhattan, made of materials so dense that a piece of it the size of a sugar cube would weigh about as much as a mountain. And it turns 30 times a second, firing a beam of radiation out along its magnetic axis as it goes. That beam has been sweeping across this planet, tick after tick, since before the Norman conquest. Every pulse a radio telescope picks up today is one rotation of the same object the Song Court was looking at with the naked eye. One footnote that makes it stranger. The nebula doesn't quite trace back to 1054 anymore. Run the modern numbers, and you land decades late. Because the cloud is speeding up. It's being blown outward from the inside by the wind coming off the thing at its heart. The corpse is still pushing. So when Yang Weide wrote down a reddish-white star with rays in 4 directions, he wasn't recording an omen. He was recording the final 3 weeks of a star's visible life from 6,500 light-years away, without knowing that any of those words applied. The object that replaced it is still broadcasting. It just doesn't do it in a color anybody can see. Number 2, the seventh sister. Almost every culture that named the Pleiades called them 7 sisters. Go outside tonight and count. You'll get 6. They're a small silver smudge over your shoulder in winter. A knot of hot blue stars about 440 light-years out, drifting through a cloud of dust that catches their light and glows with it. And the story attached to them is close to identical on 4 continents. They were also, for most of human history, a clock. Hesiod told Greek farmers to plow when the Pleiades set and reap when they rose. Half the world's agricultural calendars hang off that one little cluster, and sailors used its rising to decide when the sea was safe. So this is not some obscure corner of the sky that nobody bothered to check carefully. It's the most closely watched group of stars in human history, and the count has been wrong the entire time. The Greek version comes down through Ovid, who couldn't decide which explanation he preferred, and gave both. In one, the missing sister is Merope, who married a mortal, while her sisters took gods and hides her face in shame. In the other, she's Electra, who couldn't watch Troy burn and covered her eyes. 3 centuries before Ovid, Aratus had already stated the problem flatly. 7 are spoken of, 6 are seen. In Australia, the Seven Sisters songline runs for hundreds of kilometers of country, carried by the Martu, by Pitjantjatjara, and Yankunytjatjara people, by the Nganyatjara. Seven Sisters pursued relentlessly across the land and then into the sky by a man Yurla in Martu country Wati Niru, further south. In many tellings, one sister is missing, hiding or too young or taken, and it isn't a myth in the past tense. The songline is still sung and still walked, tied to specific rock holes and specific stretches of country you can stand in. Two peoples on opposite sides of the planet with no contact for tens of thousands of years, telling the same shape of story. A group of sisters, a man chasing them, one of them gone. Ray Norris, an astronomer at Western Sydney University, published an argument in 2021 that this is not coincidence, but inheritance. Two of the Pleiades, Pleione and Atlas, sit about 5 arcminutes apart in our sky. That's close enough that the brighter one's glare swallows the fainter, which is why most people see 6. And that has less to do with your eyesight than with glare. The eye can resolve much finer detail than 5 arcminutes in good light. But a bright star smears a halo 3 or 4 arcminutes wide across your retina, and Pleione is sitting inside Atlas's. Run their motion backwards 100,000 years, and the pair separates to roughly 8.5 arcminutes. Far enough apart for a good eye to split them into 2 points of light. 7 stars. Norris's proposal is that the story is genuinely that old, and that it walked out of Africa with us. That is a minority position, and it has taken fire. Bradley Schaefer, an astronomer at Louisiana State University, has said the underlying positional data are wrong, and the 2 stars have barely separated at all. He also makes a plainer objection. Cultures gender the sky constantly. There are enormous numbers of traditional stories, and coincidences between any 2 of them are cheap. The premise isn't even universal. Lithuanian tradition saw a sieve up there. Other cultures, a hen with chicks. And there's a duller possibility nobody likes Pleione is a genuinely variable star, and it may simply have faded within human memory. Any of those could be true. The observation underneath them survives regardless. Somebody at some point counted 7. Somebody later counted 6. And instead of correcting the number, people across the world invented a reason for the loss and kept telling it. They're still up there, 6 or 7, depending on your eyes and your sky. Which brings us to the last thing on this list, and the only one we took from ourselves. Number 1. The Milky Way. More than a third of the people alive have never seen the galaxy they live inside. Not through a telescope, not in a photograph, just up at night with their own eyes. The thing our species navigated by, farmed by, and buried its dead facing. For a third of us, it's gone. It wasn't destroyed. We put a lamp in front of it. Start with the concession. Nobody can get inside the head of anyone who looked at that band of light before writing existed. But once people started writing, they wrote about it constantly. One of the oldest continuous threads in human culture. The Greeks called it Galaxias Kyklos, the milky circle spilled from a goddess's breast. That is why you live in a galaxy. The word is a description of how the sky used to look from Greece. In Finland and the Baltic, it was the bird's path. The road migrating birds followed south. Across parts of North America, it was the road the dead walked. The Inca did something stranger. They built constellations out of the dark, not the bright stars, the black dust lanes between them. The whole band was Mayu, a celestial river, the source of the water below. Inside it, they saw a llama with Alpha and Beta Centauri as its 2 eyes, a fox at its feet, a serpent, a toad tied to the planting season. You cannot see a dark constellation in a compromised sky. The contrast just isn't there. The Kamilaroi and Awalayi peoples of northwestern New South Wales read the same dark lanes as an emu. Its head is the coal sack, the black patch under the Southern Cross. Its neck and body run out through the dust toward Scorpius. In autumn, the emu appears to be running, which is when the females chase the males. In winter, it appears to be sitting the way a male sits on the nest, and the eggs can be taken. By late winter, the figure resolves into a pair of rings, and that means the eggs are finished for the year. It's a working calendar built entirely out of the places where there are no stars. Egypt may be in this chain too. In 2024, Grauer at the University of Portsmouth argued that the Milky Way lights up the body of Nut, the sky goddess, arched over the world in tomb paintings. Her arms in winter, her spine in summer. It's a hypothesis, not a finding, and Egyptologists have not signed off on it. Then we deleted it in about a century. A global atlas of artificial night sky brightness, published in 2016, put numbers on it. The Milky Way is now hidden from more than a third of humanity, including roughly 80% of North Americans. Haze lifts. It's a permanent dome of scattered light sitting over the places where most people live. And it's accelerating. In 2023, Christopher Kaiba and colleagues published something better than satellite data. Actual naked eye star counts from tens of thousands of ordinary people over a decade all over the world. The sky is brightening by close to 10% a year. Take a child born under a sky that shows 250 stars. Same house, same window, 18 years later. They'll be down to about 100. Under a genuinely dark sky, you can see somewhere around 2,000 stars at once. From the middle of a large city, you can see about 30. Every other site on this list was taken by physics. The star in Lupus burned out. The comet left and isn't coming back. The pole slid off Thuban because the Earth wobbles. And no one was ever going to stop that. Those are closed files. You can grieve them, but you can't do anything about them. This one is different. And that's why it's last. Nobody decided to erase the Milky Way. It happened one light fitting at a time, installed by people thinking about parking lots. Nothing was destroyed. The galaxy is exactly where it always was, which means there's a version of tonight where you drive far enough out. Sit in the dark for 20 minutes until your eyes give up on the streetlights and look up at the same band of light that told the Kamilaroi when the eggs were finished. That told the Inca where the rivers came from. That told the Greeks a goddess had spilled something. It's still there. It hasn't moved an inch. Everything else on this list is gone for good. This one is just waiting for somebody to turn the lights off. The sky isn't the only place we've lost things. Subscribe, and the next one will find you.